In 2026 alone, about 3,800 Palestinians, nearly half of them children, have been displaced due to settler violence, demolitions, and evictions. Settler violence has reached unprecedented levels. So far this year, the UN has documented more than 1,430 incidents involving Israeli settlers that resulted in casualties, property damage, or both, affecting approximately 260 Palestinian communities, and many incidents occurred in the presence of Israeli forces. The pattern is clear. Palestinian populations are increasingly being forcibly displaced from villages across the West Bank before the settlers seize the vacated land. Settler attacks, which were previously concentrated in Area C, are increasingly reported in Area A, and even in Area B, and even in Area A. Israeli military operations and movement restrictions continue to disrupt civilian life and humanitarian operations, while refugee camps particularly affected. We must be clear-eyed about what's taking place. These are interconnected steps, not isolated developments. They are reshaping the West Bank, weakening Palestinian governance, and advancing de facto annexation.
The numbers tell us just how grave the situation has become. Between January 2024 and the end of July this year, 174 Palestinian children were verified killed by the UN in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. That is more than one child every week. More than 1,500 were injured. Nearly half of those injured were wounded by live ammunition. Over the same period, 3 Israeli children were killed and 15 injured. Boys, particularly adolescent boys, account for most of the children who have been killed and injured. The UN continues to monitor and verify grave violations against children in the West Bank. These include incidents in which children were shot when they did not pose an imminent threat. Some were shot while running away, while others were simply caught in the violence around them.
For more on the Security Council meeting, let's speak to Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who is on standby. Sherwin, good evening to you. So we understand that there were a number of calls from council members for collective action to arrest the deteriorating situation in the West Bank, while some also expressed frustration at the slow pace in shifting the dynamics in Gaza. But in the absence of collectivism, what were some of the views that were expressed by the various members?
So, Bongiwe, if Gaza is the backdrop to all of this, perhaps Iran, part of the framing, then the West Bank essentially becomes the new front in a Middle East that is really struggling to dig itself out of a perpetual cycle of violence and destruction. And so that is what was essentially presented to the UN Security Council. But as you and I have discussed on multiple occasions, this is a council that is hamstrung by a lack of reform. It is hamstrung by the bilateral relationship that essentially frames how this multilateral organ deals with its mandate in terms of arresting threats to international peace and security. I'll give you a quick rundown. France said, settler violence against Palestinian people is on the rise in a climate of impunity and is being met with no response from Israeli armed forces. These acts of terror are unacceptable. The French also criticized terrorist attacks directed at Israeli citizens. The United States reiterated its opposition to the annexation of the West Bank, but said it appreciated the Israeli authorities' efforts to arrest the extremist violence that has targeted Palestinians. The only country to acknowledge Israeli efforts in dealing with this extremism. The United Kingdom said, we call on the government of Israel to fulfill their obligations to protect the Palestinian population in the occupied territory. China said the lives of Palestinian people are just as precious as those of any other people. The international community must uphold a clear sense of right and wrong and build consensus. Pakistan said it was clear that illegal measures were being deployed to change the demographics on the ground and undermine that pathway to a two-state solution. Russia said the West Bank was facing a point of no return with the risk of profound destabilization in the entire region. Liberia's ambassador took us down to in history and reminded us of that resolution 181, that was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1947, that essentially recommended the partitioning of British-ruled Palestine into 2 independent states, one Jewish, one Arab. And so far, 79 years later, we only have the fulfillment of one of those aspirations, which is the Israeli state, but no independent Palestinian state. This is a little more of what Ambassador Lewis G. Brown from Liberia said in his intervention. Watch.
Today, this council treats the two-state solution like a permanent destination we describe in briefings rather than a political decision we actually enforce. We deplore, we adjoin, and meanwhile, physical facts on the ground are set in concrete. The latest UN reports lay bare a rapidly deteriorating reality across the West Bank. Acceleration of the E1 settlement project and ongoing land grabs threaten to sever the West Bank in two, dealing an irreversible blow to any viable contiguous Palestinian future. These are not administrative adjustments. They are the systematic burial of peace.
So essentially, Ambassador Brown of Liberia, non-permanent member of the council there, Bongiwe, is saying that continued settlement activity in the West Bank, which could essentially be part of a future independent Palestinian state, that settlement activity, quote, is the systematic burial of peace.
Sure. And Sherwin, the council also hearing from both the Palestinian and Israeli ambassadors. What were some of the key takeaways from the interventions?
Yeah, the two key ambassadors in this conversation, right? We might as well talk about what they said in the council. Palestine, for his part, Ambassador Riyad Mansour, saying we need the international community, the Security Council in particular, to help the state of Palestine that lives under a, quote, ruthless occupation, illegal occupation. He referred to the words in that advisory opinion by the International Court of Justice that this was an illegal occupation that needed to end as rapidly as possible. He said they appreciated efforts to make the occupation less vicious in the pathway to ending the illegal occupation, but ending the occupation had to be the goal, not making it nice on the way there. The Israeli ambassador, Danny Danon, pushed back at some of this criticism in the council. He said enforcement against extremist violence was ongoing by Israeli authorities, that the Israeli government condemned the violence, that they prosecute these crimes, they hold perpetrators accountable. Addressing extremist violence, he said, was a priority of the Israeli government. He accused the council of bias for only focusing on violence directed at Palestinians and not violence directed at Israeli citizens. He called this a double standard. He also said that Jews were not occupiers of Judea and Samaria. This is the terminology referred to in place of calling it the West Bank. Our right to live in our land is based on the historical connection to it, as described in the Torah, the Old Testament, and the Quran. He said, the council must understand a simple truth. And here's a quote for you, Bongiwe. This is from the Israeli ambassador, we are not going anywhere. Jewish communities will stay in Judea and Samaria, just like the Palestinian communities. And therein lies the conundrum that faces this council. This is a land that is in dispute between both sides. The Palestinians claim it as their own. The Israelis say they're not going anywhere. The international community says it's illegal under international law. But you have a council that is simply not able to act collectively to arrest the situation. So where do we go from here? Except back to studio in Johannesburg.
And indeed, as we continue to circle back here to see then if there will ever be an end in sight to what's going on. But appreciate your time. Thank you for just casting a spotlight to a story, that has taken somewhat of the back seat, but really is just as important in the current discourse. Appreciate it. That's Sherwin Bryce-Pease there speaking to us live from New York.